How's it going, everyone? So here we are in the final part. We are going to wrap this up actually, which is super exciting. We're back in Maya, so it's been a while since we've seen this view, but what we have to do is just kind of get this model quickly prepared for exporting to Marmoset. We're going to go through all of that. I kind of want to talk a little bit about why we choose the renders that we're doing and some sort of theory behind how we set things up. And then we're going to go ahead and do a test render, a real render, and we're going to finish it off by touching it up in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and go and do that. I'm going to start by saving this guy here as a new scene because I don't want to mess anything up. We're going to be sort of shifting around these layers. We don't really want to do anything that's irreversible here. So let's save scene as. I'm just going to call this, let's see, render underscore 01. Anytime we're doing a big change like this, it's always important to make sure we have something to fall back on if something goes wrong here. Because what I want to do is essentially combine this more or less into the core sort of parts. So the frame, the inside, and the keys. So all the key parts here, let's go ahead and combine them. And I'm doing this because these guys all share one texture set. I'd rather just have them be one piece. Then we have the inside low, which is of course a ton of pieces here. Mesh, combine those guys. Freeze transform select history on that, which will kill off the groups. If I'm not mistaken, there shouldn't be anything in these guys, so we can get rid of that. Same with this. Just making sure, looking at wireframe, nothing selected. So we have keys inside. And then for the frame, same thing. A lot less parts here. Mesh, combine, freeze transform, delete history. And that'll get rid of that layer for us as well. Cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and name these appropriately. Frame, inside, and keys. This is just going to, I guess I could just call this keyboard, since I think something is already called keys. Same with inside, we can call this inner. Yeah, we'll just go with that. So that's just going to make it a lot easier when we import this into Toolbag. This way we only have 3 things to worry about instead of like 300. And then really quickly, just to make sure we're not forgetting anything, let's go ahead and assign those materials that we made, because we still want each material set, each thing with a different UV set, to be broken up when we bring it into Toolbag. I don't think anything's happened to the way that we set it up since we put it in Painter, but just to be safe, I'm just going to right click and whoa, let's try that again. Right click, assign existing material, and let's just give them new materials. We can call this just frame, just because these are going to be imported into Toolbag with us. This is just for organization purposes. The keys, we can assign a material as well. And of course it's going to add a 1 to it since we already have things named this, but that's totally fine. These are just very temporary. And we'll give this one as well. Inside. Perfect. So these guys are now ready to go and be sent off to Marmoset. There's actually a few little things that we're going to have to change around here. Like, I think there's like a normal that's kind of like exposed here, and I wanted to cap that up. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this guy, I wanted to flip him and invert him. But let's just bring this guy into Toolbag for now, and we'll deal with it as it pops up. So I'm just going to grab these guys, these 3 things here. We can go to File, Export Selection. I'm going to be using FBX, but let's go find a good folder for this. We can make a new folder called Render. And I'm just going to call this SM for static mesh underscore typewriter 01. Just some random standard naming convention for stuff you do in games. So it's going to shoot that out. Awesome. And we can dive into Toolbag. Toolbag is on the surface a very basic program, and it is pretty simple, but the amount of quality you can get out of your renders here is truly amazing. So let's start off by going to File, Import Model, and just get this guy in here. So here we go. We have our 3 materials. This is just, like I said, for convenience. These materials, though, if you were to bring it into like Unreal or Unity, would also be set up this way as well. So if you really are going to be using this for a game engine, make sure that you're using the names that you want. You don't want it to be like frame 1 inside 1. You might want to shimmy around some of your naming conventions there. But here we are inside of the render viewport. I'm just going to do some really quick things just to sort of make this looking a little bit nicer. So if we go to Sky and Skylight, we have all these preset sort of HDRIs, they're called. It's these sort of 360 degree images here. And they're going to sort of be our ambient lighting. I'm just going to start with Museum because this is one that I trust to be pretty good. A lot of these are just bad. I don't know what it is with Toolbag, but a lot of these are horrible. There are some websites. I'm just going to search this. HDRI Haven is one of them. And if you go here, it's just a ton of free HDRIs. So you can download these and you can install them into Toolbag if there's something here that sort of has a lighting setup you'd like. I'll add a link to that file with all the plugins and sort of free stuff, but very useful. I haven't dabbled with it too much, but whenever I had, it's been a pretty easy process. And these are the same things that you can use in, you can use it in Unreal, and you can also use it in Substance Painter and stuff like that. Anything where there's an HDRI, but for now we're going to stick with Museum because we're going to be relying on mostly other sources of light. Another thing that I typically do right away is ambient sky is the background, so it's actually going to be showing the sort of, let me see here. It's showing this picture in the background. It's interesting how it's not unblurring it. I must have done something. But the background is going to be, essentially these colors are being based off of this. I don't really like that. I'd rather just have it be a solid color. We can still get the room's HDR lighting, but it's just, we're not focusing on that. We want to be focusing on the prop itself. So I typically take this, turn it to a muted color, want the saturation low. Typically, what I would do is pick a color here that's very opposite to the colors on our prop. So that way there's a little bit more contrast. It makes the prop pop out quite a bit more. I'm going to want this to be dark because once again, we're focusing on this. We might experiment with this being a light, like very subtle colored background. Something like this might be interesting. But this is like a final step. It takes 2 seconds to change this. For now, I'm going to keep it dark so we can really focus in on this guy. So we got this guy in. We're going to have to start setting up these materials. So let's go over to our first material. We can also make materials here and set it up however we want. But let's just actually start bringing these guys in. One thing I did forget to do between the last part and this part is actually rename these textures. So it's just going to be a little bit of trial and error getting these guys in. So let's just kind of, I guess, give this a shot. If I had to guess, it would be the first one is all the frame stuff. So we can just try. I'm going to put the color into albedo. And I was correct. Okay, so this obviously looks horrible right now. We're just going to have to give it a bit of a second. Albedo is going to be our base color. We have this one which says gloss. We're going to actually want to change this to roughness because we've been using a roughness map when we were using Substance Painter. So let's see if I can figure out which of these is correct. We have this map here. This is a RMA map that we made before. So if you remember in the last part in texturing, we packed roughness into the red channel, metallic into the green channel, and ambient occlusion into the blue channel. It seems to be correct because we're getting these bolts to be rusty in the right spot, and we have the channel set to red, so this is correct, which means I can continue to use this for the rest of the maps. Specular, we're going to change that to metallic since we used a metal map. I'm going to drag this guy in and make sure we're using that green channel for the metal like we talked about. We also have occlusion, and I'm going to drop that same map in. So these are all the same, and I'm going to make sure it's set to B for where we slotted in our ambient occlusion. And next, all we have to do is bring in the normal map, which is going to go right at the top. Let's see. Might be a bit tricky to figure out what map this is, and I think we got it on the first try. Yep, okay, this is correct. So this is essentially how I'm setting all this up. As you can see, we can use this one packed map for 3 different spots, which is why it's pretty ideal. I'm going to brighten this up so we can kind of see what we're doing a little bit better, but that is definitely correct as far as the roughness goes. We have the thumbprint that we left there before, and looking good. We can move to the inside now. Let's see if we can get this correct as well. Drop on albedo. Perfect. So that's correct. Same process. This is a normal map, so I don't want that. Okay. Right, I'm going to be getting rid of these, but I'm glad that that popped up. And yeah, realistically, I should have just named these better from the start, but I'm just dragging them in from off screen, and these all seem to be right. So this is roughness. We're then going to make this metal and change it to G. And for occlusion, same map once again, but it's being driven by the blue channel. That's not looking too bad. Obviously, we're in the very early stages here, and then we'll do the same thing for keys. So this should be the albedo. Yep. We're going to make this roughness and metallic. So this should then be the normal, if I'm not mistaken. No. But I think that is the RMA. Roughness, metallic, and occlusion. We just need that normal map now. I'm just really guessing at this point. Right, there we go. So all our materials are set up. Let's go ahead and save the scene before we go any further, since we have this all in place now. We're in just the render tab here. I'm going to call this typewriter. Keep it simple. It's really nice because we can actually go to File, Open a Recent, and we can know what our last project was. And yeah, it's nice to have everything in here. Like I said, this part was something I was experimenting with, and I decided to remove it. So let's use this as an opportunity to go over something pretty cool within Toolbag. So say I take this, and I think, yeah, I have them on the back as well. I'm going to get rid of these because I didn't actually include them in the final model. But Toolbag supports sort of live updating. So if we take this, we hit File, Export Selection, and just save over this, and we go here, we'll notice that it's disappeared. So anytime we swap out a material, any of the models, anything like that, it's just going to update in real time, which is really, really convenient. But yeah, we can start to really get to the nitty gritty of this stuff. We have a lot of settings to go through, but one of the main things we really need to worry about is lighting. So I just wanted to quickly go over kind kind of at least my understanding of lighting, and then maybe we can talk about some other examples from artists that I follow. So obviously my work isn't perfect. That should go without saying. Like I'm trying to learn as much as I can, and this whole typewriter thing has been an opportunity for me to learn more as well. But this is one of the things where I'm more happy with how the lighting turned out, and I'll show you exactly what I try to accomplish with my lighting. One of the main things is I want contrast. So we have a warm area here and a cool area here. I really like that, sort of having these two different contrasting colors. Another important thing is to have rim lights here, sort of like a highlight around things. You can see that's a pretty common theme here, highlights. Another thing is we really want to use the rule of thirds to our advantage, and that's kind of having areas of focus in, little sections of threes here. So this is on the first of three sides if we were to split this up into three places, and same with this area here where we're getting the screen and this bullet. You also want to set things up where you have a lot of leading lines, right? So if we look at this picture, we start here, or we could start here, it doesn't really matter either way, but let's say we start here, we look at this, it's pointing here, this line sort of arcs to here, makes us look down. We then follow this trail here to these bullets that go over here and point us back up. Puts us in kind of this infinite loop, and it really guides our eye. And that's kind of how I go about things. Once again, I'm not perfect with this, but you should be conscious of these things, at least when you're sort of going about your renders. Once again, just rim light, some warms and some cools. And that's pretty much how I go about it. If we look at some of the things that I like here, let's find some good examples. This guy is an incredible weapons artist who is doing some work on Modern Warfare, but you can see just how clear it is. Like, it's just like, this is all we're really focused on. I love these kind of renders, just displaying as much information as possible. This is a great example as well. Give it a second to load in. Just all the clarities on the weapon. There's no weird kind of depth of field issues. It's super crisp. The lighting is great. Obviously it's a gun, but there is this sort of leading line idea. These renders are always really interesting. The rim lights are very, very apparent. So you can really go about it however you want. But let's just focus for clarity and just sort of guiding the eye in the ways that you want it to be guided. And just be a bit more conscious about all these stuff. So look through some props, try and see what people are doing that's so fascinating. And this is another great example. Just so much clarity. It's like, just look at this. All the focus is on it. Some cools and some warm tones everywhere. And some beautiful shots. So let's try and set up the same thing. There's a bunch of nifty tricks that we can do here inside of Toolbag, but I want to start by getting some basic lighting in here. If we click on this image here, you can see we're adding in some kind of light. And what this is a child light that we have attached to our main skylight. So we can rotate it. It'll sort of rotate with this, but it's actually a light here. And we can control it. We can affect the direction that it's facing. We can affect the intensity of it. And this is really just a strong way to get a good foundation of things. What I typically like to do is I turn this brightness down a lot because we don't have as much control over it other than really direction. And then I jump in with some of these lights and I'm like, okay, let's get a cool tone in here to sort of offset things a little bit. We can get it in the background and some warms in the front. Child brightness is here, so we can turn that up. We can then say, hey, let's try and pop in a warmer tone. And I kind of like the blue being in the back, so I can say, hey, let's grab this warm light we added in here and try and manually rotate it into a spot we like. Just sort of rotating it with the gizmo like we would in Maya, for example. And you can see we're in some sort of contrast between the warm and the cool, right? It's really good for showing off our roughness variation. And we can just sort of keep going through and finding some that we think are doing a pretty good job of showing off our model the way we want it to be showed off. And this is also a good time to experiment with some of these HDRIs. One thing to note though is as soon as you change this, all of your child lights will go away. So let's try and find a couple other ones where we have a lighting setup that we think looks pretty nice. This one's pretty neutral, which could be good. Museum is definitely very warm. We could try and find something that's a bit more, of a mix between blues and reds. Dark, this one's very muted. I don't think I've ever used this one for anything. This one is nice because it's like the interior of a home, could match our theme. If we start to kind of drop these in. And we can play with that more. We can say, hey, let's go to this light. We can affect the brightness on it. We can say make it a little bit warmer. Same with the other light. We can maybe make it a little bit cooler, not too much. And maybe rotate it so it's coming in from an opposite direction. And we can start to get some cool stuff. This might be the one that I stick with for now at least. Overall it's a bit dark, so we can turn up the child brightness and the main brightness as well. But the main brightness brings the child brightness up with it, so let's just sort of play with it a bit more. One thing I want to do before we get too far is actually in Renderer, and we'll be going over a lot of these settings soon, but there's a way to set up our color profile, or perhaps it's camera. Right, okay, so here, under main camera, tone mapping, if you remember when we were inside of Substance Painter, we set up sort of a LUT to make our colors be a bit more accurate to how we were going to set things up in both Unreal, if we were to do that, as well as Marmoset Toolbag, and that was called the Aces LUT. As you can see here, built into Toolbag, we have this Aces LUT here. We can activate it. It makes everything a lot darker, but now these colors are actually matching a little bit more how we had it set up inside of Substance Painter. So this is a lot more accurate, and it's just going to make sure that our textures are actually the same color and all that as we were working with before. So in doing so, we're going to have to just sort of adjust things a little bit. Might want to bring up the background a little bit, but it's really crispy and it's really starting to look a lot more like how we had it previously set up. So this is a good start, but there's a lot more that we really have to add and affect here. I just sort of like the warms and the cools. Another thing is definitely a rim light that I want to add, and we really need to mess with a lot of these values. We are pretty far from where I'd actually want this to be. So let's see. Let's start with some more of these camera options themselves. So first of all, we have sort of the focus. This is if you want depth of field, so if you want like a blurry foreground or a blurry background. We're going to be messing with that later, but I'm not going to touch it right now. We're not going to be messing with this because we already have it set up to our LUT. This is sharpen, so we can turn this up to really sharpen our image. I am going to be doing that. I'd recommend sharpening things a little bit. It just sort of makes it all a little bit more crispier. Bloom, I don't recommend it. It's just kind of like fuzzy, soft look to it. I typically keep that off, but there are occasions where, like, if you have a lens flare or something, it could be nice. Vignette is really nice. It just sort of adds a dark shadow around the edges. I typically like to have at least a little bit of it, but it's not going to be affecting us too much because we're going to be editing this in Photoshop later. And then we have grain, and this is kind of like adding some noise to it. And the reason we'd want to do that is because when we have a vignette or any color that's sort of like a gradient, you'll start to notice that there's like banding. So you'll start to notice these like harsh lines through the gradation, and just by adding a bit of grain, it solves that. So you just add a little bit where you don't notice it on this model per se, but you notice it in the edges, and it just sort of fixes that for us, which is really nice. So that's good to know. I don't want to work on focus just quite yet, but field of view, this is what I'm looking for. So field of view is, if you've played a lot of games, you're probably familiar with FOV, at least if you've played on PC, something like Minecraft or something like that. If we crank this all the way forward, we're getting this crazy sort of perspective look on things, right? Very interesting look. Typically, if you want something a bit more cinematic in your renders, and this weapon render is a great example of that, you want to crank that down quite a bit, so it fits things in a shot a bit more. So I typically like to keep it around 20, and we can manually type that in. And as you can see, it's like sort of chunked everything together. 20 might be a little bit low. We could say like 25, but we're just fitting a lot more into the screen now, right? Because I think before, whatever, it was like 50. And if we zoom in, like this part is hidden, this part's sticking out weird, and it's warping. 25 are able to sort of fit in quite a bit more and get a really nice render where we sort of have everything and all our bases covered. I might even go a little bit lower to 23, but we can of course always change this. It's pretty non-destructive, so let's let that do its thing. And I think that'll mostly be it for the main camera until we come back to the focus. So we can go over to renderer. This is a pretty important one. I'm just going to quickly blaze through this. Resolution, before you render, what you want to do is crank this up. It literally just doubles the sharpness of everything. When you're working though, you want to keep it on 1:1 or half, which you can see kind of destroys the quality, but it also makes it a lot smoother of an experience. And then you can just turn it back up before you render. But for now, I'm going to keep it on 1:1. It's just going to make it easier to work with, and we won't even notice a difference until we render. Anti-aliasing, keep it on. It's just going to make things a little bit smoother. Wireframe, if you want to do a wireframe render to show things off, gives you the opportunity to change the color of the wireframe as well. Pretty damn useful. Lighting, so we're going to be wanting to turn this stuff on. Local reflections are going to be letting the light bounce off of things on the model itself locally. We can see it brightens up some of these areas and sort of darkens some others. Keep an eye on like the metal and see how it reacts. Mostly here is a good example, as it lets light bounce a little bit more and give it some proper reflections. Internal refraction, we don't have anything that would need that. That's more glass. Shadows, I'm going to crank that onto ludicrous. Use cascades. GI is a very important one. So you can see when we turn that on, everything just went super dark. It's because we had to turn up the brightness. Global illumination is kind of this like default lightness that's sort of built in. How do I explain GI? I guess it's a little sad that I can't do that. GI is just kind of like the lighting that naturally occurs in the world. So when we turn that on, it's just going to be representing how light would realistically behave a little bit more. I can crank that up as well to make it a bit more realistic. We can sort of set a bound for it. I would just recommend making sure the whole thing is encompassed. And we can just kind of see what that looks like here. So I can just sort of crank this box up until everything's inside. And that's just by clicking show voxels. We don't need to worry about tessellation or anything like that. Ambient inclusion is also incredibly important. This is kind of like the shadows where things are in contact. We can affect how tight those shadows are, how wide they are. And then at the bottom, if you just want to put on a watermark, which I guess shows that you can render this in real time, but you can always do that in Photoshop later, so it's really not a big deal. So, okay. We are far from a perfect render here. Where do we go to clean this guy up? We have most of our settings in place, but it really is our lighting that is kind of our Achilles heel right now. I'm going to start by turning the brightness up quite a bit and see if we can mess with the angle to get it to be a little bit more how we want it. We have these very harsh shadows as well. If we affect the width of it, it'll make things a bit softer, right? We can see these shadows getting softer. We can also turn off shadows completely, but that looks a little bit silly. I do think this deserves to be a lot brighter though, so I'm gonna keep that, and I want it coming in from the right, shining down. And I might soften the shadows a little bit. You can see it also mutes kind of the reflection a little bit as well. So you got to be careful and kind of pick your battles with this stuff. Let's move on to the next light. This is kind of shining on the side. You can see it sort of bleeding over here as well. I kind of think it's a little unideal to have this area lit, but let's just see what this last light is doing. This one's more encompassing everything. I'm just going to move the, rotate it so the shadow isn't really in the way. It's just kind of adding additional light to everything. So I'm just trying to find an angle where I can see. I really like how the logo shows, so I'm trying to find like a good angle that encompasses all of that. Okay, this light I can keep. This one. Just really want to be careful with the angle. I want to make sure, because the way it is before, I don't like how this shadow is cut off here. It looks a little strange. And I don't like this part being cut off as well. I don't like this being poked through. So I want to rotate it up a little bit. But then it affects down here. So just really playing with the rotation of it. I guess I could play into it more, and that's one solution. And just really own up to it. Have this sort of harsh blue light. Baby blue, kind of bright light. It's always interesting to double the quality and see how it looks now. But you can see we're starting to lag a little bit now. It's not too bad, but it's definitely happening. One thing you can always do though, when this does happen, is if you click the rocket ship, it turns off a lot of the crazy effects and it makes it way faster. It's just a really quick way to sort of reframe things without too much consequence. So let's see if we can get this light to be a little bit more where we want it to be. I like how it's shining through here now, but down here, I'm not too sure. I kind of want to try something. If we go to Scene and Add Objects, we can add a shadow catcher, and this is going to be a plane on the ground. That's just going to sort of allow us to have a shadow. I don't know if I really like that for this. This shadow being here is a little bit strange, but as you see, when we rotate it, the shadows sort of go along with it. So I'm going to get rid of that. I don't really like it, but it is good for bounce light. So there's multiple uses for it. I'm going to take this light that we were working on and sort of pull it back a little bit. What I'm focusing on right now is up here. And that's like an easy Photoshop fix to really just sort of like mask out that light part. But then down here is also not the best. So we could also just really play it to our advantage and just like have it really be kind of like center stage, but I don't like that too much. I don't mind that. That's actually really nice. We do have some more shadows here, but I don't think it's that bad, especially if we turn up the brightness and just sort of like make it more intentional. I do want a rim light in the background, something that's really going to add a lot of brightness. So let's find a sort of bright spot back here. Something like this. Crank the brightness way up. And we want it to be kind of shining from the back. This one might pose to be a little bit more difficult to do because we can actually see through a lot of our model, but it's still pretty important to have some kind of, I think, rim light effect. We're really getting it on one side here. I think what I'm going to do, just so I can see this a little bit better, is move this over here. This white arrow is actually what's determining where the light is coming from, and it might just be easier to get this right if we can actually see exactly where it's coming from. So yeah, a rim light is going to be tricky on this one because it's actually just filling up the inside here. It's kind of nice how that's poking through, but not exactly what I want. So we can try something different for this. First of all, I like where this camera is positioned, so I'm going to make a new camera. Just call this guy temp. It doesn't retain the camera settings that we have for it, so if we're in this camera, and we can sort of change between them here, we're not going to be having the previous camera settings. So I'm just going to use this as a temp. And I guess a better way of doing that is we could actually duplicate this camera by hitting Control D, and then we'd actually just retain all the camera settings. And this is the one we were in by default, right? So I can just name this one temp, jump into this, and we're going to be having all the same settings, but it gives us two cameras. So I can sort of be out here working on stuff and then jump back to the main camera. So that's pretty useful. What I wanted to do is bring in a light with this light icon and have that be sort of our rim light here. Rim light should be coming from the exact opposite position. So let's just stay here, and when we hit light, it'll automatically put a light in where our camera was. So let's jump back into our main camera. So it's definitely adding some rim light in some spots, which is pretty nice. But we got to get the angle a little bit better. So I'm going to lower it down. And there's going to be a lot of settings that we can play with here. But let's just get this guy in position first. Okay, one thing I really like about Toolbag is I can Control Z a camera move. But let's just move down here. Move this into a position we think we'd like. And zoom right back in. I just wanted highlighting some of these rims here. Because of so, I'm going to aim it up a little bit more. We can sort of play with the width on things. Once again, that's going to be affecting how harsh things are, but spot angle is going to be how much it actually encompasses. So I can turn that down so it's just the top. Spot sharpness, so there's less fall off. And of course the color. Nothing is going to be perfectly white ever, so I'm just going to add a bit of a blue tint. That's something important with lighting. Nothing's ever going to be white, so always tint it either a warm color or a cool color, even if it's very, very slight. Contact refinement. I think that boosts the quality a little bit. It's just not going to hurt to turn on. Let's go back to our temp camera. It might be a distance problem at this point that we're facing, so I might just want to bring this guy a lot closer. And if not, I have another thing that I might want to try here. As you can see, we're getting it pretty crazy bright here. Can bring the spot angle up. Still not getting it on the spot we really want it. It might be because we want it shining down. And then we can sort of affect the distance to really bring it in. So we just have it really affecting here. I think that's definitely helping a lot. I think the blue a little bit more apparent. I'm noticing that this blue is affecting in here a little bit. I don't like that a ton, but maybe we could just change the camera angle a little bit. Okay, one thing I do want to try, because I'm pretty happy with this overall, like realistically, when I'm doing renders, like I tinker with it a little bit more. I try and find some angles that I really like I would enjoy this angle, but then I would be like, oh, let's try and find one from this angle. Like, for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to be doing one angle here, but since I'm overall pretty content with this angle, I'm going to try and see if we could get some focus options that we like. See, if we turn on depth of field, we have like, it's focused here, blurry everywhere else. We can affect how blurry the front is compared to the back. And all this does is, since it mimics a real camera, it makes it look a little bit more realistic, right? So focus distance, we can change what part it's focused on. Could turn down the far blur, maybe just have a little bit. Same with the near blur. So we're really focusing on this area. The thing is, if you do these kind of shots, I highly recommend also having a lot of shots without blur. Some far blur, some near blur, really makes this area pop. Max, what is this exactly? Bokeh size? I can't remember exactly how to pronounce that, but this is kind of like the harshness of how much we're focusing and how much area we're focusing on at once. So if I turn it down, we're focusing on a lot more. If I turn it up, we're focusing on a lot less at once. Maybe we can just sort of like use it to subtly blur out some areas while really focusing in on some others, which is nice. So, you know, it's not always going to be perfect because we're blurring out some stuff here that I don't like. And I would typically maybe use a shot, like some blur for a shot like this maybe, where I'm focusing on the keys. And I would like focus in on some of these keys and have these ones blurred out. This is just mostly an example as to how to do it. Let's just bring this back. So sort of, you know, be careful with it. I'm going to turn up the far blur and the near blur a little bit, just to really focus in on here. It's just kind of nice to like have this area blurred out, for example, and really focus in on some areas. But be careful with it. You've put a lot of time and work into your models, presumably, so you don't want to kind of kill off a lot of the detail that you're working with. So be, you know, kind of picky with this kind of shot. I guess for this case, I'm actually just going to straight up turn it off. Pairs pretty well with the sharpen. Can turn that up a little bit more. Once again, bloom, not going to mess with that. And you can still mess with this, but there's no point. We're going to dive into Photoshop with them a little bit more. But this is like a general render. Like this is pretty much, for the most part, where I'd be happy leaving it. Let's see something actually. Maybe I'll turn off far blur. Turn up near blur. Turn down the intensity of it and really have it focus in on the middle. And let's say this is our shot. Let's say we're going to be going through with this. It's really blurring out some areas. Let's just make the background blurry then. It's really interesting to see what it's picking up first, but I guess this is all the stuff that's closest. Sticky focus. Let's turn this down. Let's just have far blur on, and we can just turn off near blur. Yeah, something like this, sure. Turn it down a little so it's mostly in focus. And then I'm just being super picky with this at this point, but let's just pretend this is perfect. I really like the blur in there and back there, actually. This was a pretty good call. So there's a few ways that we can render this out and kind of move it around. So we could just be like, hey, this is good. Render it out, call it a day. Like I said, we also have the option of turning on wireframe. That's totally a thing. We're making sure our resolution is all the way up. Forgot to crank the quality on that. Just make sure everything's pretty much on max. There's really no harm in that. You can put the watermark on if you want. There's really no point. We're bringing this into Photoshop. One last chance to sort of affect the brightness on things. I might want to make this a bit more blue. turn down the far blur a little bit. This area's a little blurry. But for the sake of this, let's call it done. So what exactly are we going to do? We can go to capture and settings. And these are going to be sort of our output settings. Always, when you're doing renders like this, go much higher than you think you need to, because you can always scale down whenever you want. But scaling up is always going to be impossible. So for something like this, let's just turn our samples way up. This is going to be eliminating these little dots and stuff from like the real-time reflections, like here and here. So ideally put it to 400 if your computer can handle it. Let's just do 100 for now. This is the file format you want. Typically what I do is PNG with transparency. What this does is it just exports our model. The background will be transparent, so there won't be any of this black stuff. If you like how it looks here, you can just keep that off and you're good to go. And like I said, the quality always upscale, so I'm just going to go straight up to kind of like the highest preset that they have for us. And we can hit OK. And whenever we want to export this, we literally just go to capture, image, and it'll spit it out to our desktop, which is about as convenient as it gets when it comes to location. One of the things I did want to really quickly check, though, is for the sky. Like I said, it might look good with a nice light color background. It's one of those rare models I might want to try it out on, like a nice warm background. And in that case, I'd want to turn down the vignette. Vignette's something you might want to turn down anyways if we're just exporting the model, because we don't want it to be affected by that. But this could definitely go places from some certain angles, like it might turn out really nice, but for the time being, I'm just gonna use a dark background. I think it might just be better. And it's always impossible to know when to end with this stuff. You can just keep doing it. But this is mostly an example. So let's see if I can maybe rotate this in a better way. Okay. Okay, let's spit this guy out now. So what I'm going to do is go to capture, image, and like I said, it's going to put it on our desktop for us. I set it to 100 samples, so it will take a little bit of time, not too much. Whenever you're doing like test renders, realistically, don't set it to 100 samples. One thing I really recommend is every time you have some lighting that you think is okay, export a little render of it. It takes 2 seconds when you have the samples on really low. So export a little sample of it, and then every time you think you're making an improvement or doing something better, you just export, then your desktop is going to be covered in a bunch of images. You can essentially then from that point see your progress and see if there's ever a time where you think you should go back to something that you liked more. And it's just a really good reference point for seeing if things are sort of going the way that you want them to be going. So just something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is you should probably save. We haven't saved yet, but luckily nothing bad happened. So we can go check out how that looked. Really quickly though is ambient occlusion. I wanted to mess with that a bit more. So this is once again just sort of the contact shadows. You can mostly see it here. It actually lets us sort of crank this up quite a bit. That was the wrong spot. But I don't think we really need to worry about that right now. Let's go ahead and dive into Photoshop. We have this render here. And once again, like do a bunch of different setups before you move on to this sort of final render state. There's really no need to rush this, right? It's really easy to want to jump the gun when it comes to rendering because you've been working on something for so long. Like this is a great example. I've been working on this typewriter forever, man. So it's easy to be like, okay, it's good enough. It's finally done. Like, let's send it out. But you really don't want to do that. This is the way that you're really showing off your work, right? Like this was some of the best advice I've ever been given is spend as much time on your renders as you would for any other phase. Like really take a lot of time to put some care into it and look at all the best renders to see how people do it. So we can just drag this in. Looks a little weird on a backdrop like this. But let's put a layer underneath of it. Fill it black. I think you can hit Alt Backspace. Yeah, that'll fill in whatever the color is in your foreground. And we can sort of start to mess with this a little bit. We can turn the value up a little bit. And we can start to really blend things in a little bit more. The first thing I want to do is really get a nice sharpen on this. So we can go to Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. And this will give us this window here, and we can see a preview with it on and off. See if we turn up the amount of sharpening. It's subtle, but you definitely see a difference, and you can crank it. Affect the radius. It's also updating the background in real time, by the way. But you can just see it adds like a nice crisp to everything. We did sharpen inside of Toolbag, but this is just kind of like the icing on the cake. We can kind of affect the hue of the background. I suppose we do have it at just black though. Let's give it some color. Control U is going to bring up this guy here, which lets us sort of affect all of our values. Find a color that we like. Once again, I want to keep the saturation pretty low overall. The lightness pretty low, and keep it like a color that's contrasting. So we have a lot of warmth in here, so I might want the background to be a bit cool. We could try and like do warm with warm, but it just really seems like cool is the way to go here. Just kind of mess with it. This stuff isn't too important, but it's what's going to really make our model pop, right? So you want to give it some love and care as well. And I typically just want it to be pretty dark and out of the way. Next I want to add my vignette. So let's get a sort of black foreground, turn the hardness all the way down, and we can literally just make our size bigger. And with a soft brush, sort of just paint this in. We don't even have to do anything too crazy here. We can just turn the opacity lower. In fact, one thing I might want to do is, this seems very rectangular, which I don't think is doing us any favors. I think I might want to crunch this in a little bit. We don't have to worry too much about aspect ratios and stuff, right? It's just making it a little bit tighter overall, a lot more focused on the model itself. Might want to turn this up a little bit now that we have a vignette. And we can just maybe add a bit more of a vignette. Kind of give the corners a little bit more of a roundness. Okay. What's next? What more can we add? Well, we can definitely add some layers here. If we hit this little guy, we have our curves, hue, saturation, all that kind of stuff. Let's start though by going down here and inserting levels. There it is. If we hold Alt and click in between layers, we'll get this little arrow here, and this now means that this layer is only affecting the one directly underneath of it. And this is good because we don't want to be changing the color of the background. We're just using this as an opportunity to really crunch some of these values here. We can make it less lights, less dark areas, and just kind of crunching the values a little bit more. So we can sort of see what that's like with it on and off, just sort of calming down some of these things. Hue and saturation I think is a good one. Once again, I'm going to hold Alt and make it so it's only affecting this. I think we could tone down the saturation a little bit. I think that's a little crazy with some of the colors. The brightness can probably go up a bit. And even if we wanted to, we could affect the hue. I wouldn't recommend it. Like we spent some time putting the colors in we wanted, but nudging it in one direction isn't the worst idea. So really just chilling out a lot of this stuff, especially down here. I think it's doing us a lot of favors. We can add a levels in here, or not a levels, sorry, a curves. And what curves is going to do is it kind of lets us use this line as a representation of how we're affecting our color. So black to white, we can say, hey, let's make this a little bit more intense, a little bit more brighter, but we can also go into individual colors, right? Say we want it to be more red, we can pull up red. Want to get rid of some reds, we can pull it down, which I think is kind of the right move here. Say we want more red highlights, we'd pull it up here. So this is shadows and highlights. So less red shadows, we want the lighter areas to be warmer. And the opposite for blues, more blue kind of shadowy areas. We kind of pull it out of the highlights. And then green, I don't really want to affect too much either way. So we're really just adding some punch to everything. And it's always a good idea to say like, hey, maybe I went a bit too far, let's tone it back. Make this like only 50% of the strength we gave it. Okay. Still not completely sold on this background color. But we can do some more experimenting with that. Let's actually add a new layer here and play into kind of the lights that we have a bit more. We have an orangish light, so I might want to just say, hey, let's do like a quick splotch here on one of these highlight areas. Set this to overlay. Maybe soft light so it sort of bleeds out a little bit more. Turn that down. We're sort of getting warmer tones on one side. And we can do something similar on the other side, but with cooler tones. Just to kind of push that a little bit further. This is a little bit extreme for kind of my likings though. But I kind of like just having warm and cool. It's really helping a little bit. Just make it very subtle. We can add some manual highlights here as well So if we change our brush color to white, we can kind of help out some of these areas. Like this, for example. We had a rim light going on here, so we can kind of add some white here. And this looks pretty bad right now, but we'll be fixing it up in a second. This is also why I don't think bloom is necessary, because we can just sort of do this stuff manually. Add that there. Add some lines here. A little speck here. A little splotch there. And from here, what we can do is go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and really sort of explode it with some light, with some sort of blur, I guess. I don't want to take it too far, but enough that it's kind of like a natural glow. And then we can just sort of turn that down a bit. So just things like that, something to consider, where it's possible to be getting this kind of look inside of tool bag, but it's just easier to accomplish here. And I think I'm going to want to add in another levels and darken this up a little bit more. Just adding more contrast in general to everything. I'll lower this highlight a little bit more. Can tint it if you'd like as well. Yeah, so I'm not too happy with how this blur is looking, realistically. Let's go back in here and get rid of that. We didn't put enough time into it to make it look really good. So we can re-render one of these guys out. Capture image. Once again, crank it up to 400 before you actually do a proper render. But let's just sort of let this do its thing. But it is really nice to see some of these textures really crisping up here and getting the kind of correct treatment. So that's nice. Okay, let's swap this in. Just kind of roughly place it in the same spot. Just gonna blow it up for now. I know it's not going to be the same quality, but this is just an example, right? Typically you'd want the size of the frame to be the same. Once again, filter, sharpen, smart sharpen, crisp everything up a little bit. Yeah, it just looks better without the blur, honestly. Like, this is kind of like our main shot too, so it's probably best to not really mess with that too much. I'm going to get rid of this custom highlight one. Let's remake it. Some stuff there. Stuff there. Stuff there. Here. Here. Anywhere we're seeing highlights, right? Might as well just give it a little bit of an extra oomph. This is kind of like the bloom, like I said, but we just have way more control of it. Hit it with that Gaussian blur. Might even make it, opt to make it just tighter. Don't want it to be going too crazy. Can use it as an overlay even, but then we'd still want to turn it down. It's just adding a little extra, right? In the same vein, I might want to turn up the vignette. And we're really getting somewhere where I'm pretty happy with it. I feel like I'm always coming back to the background here. I think something that's bothering me is just the kind of lack of pop it has over the background. So what I might want to do is go to this render layer, and under effects we can add a drop shadow, which by default will look pretty bad. Like if we just add a distance like this looks silly. I would highly recommend staying away from this. But if we affect the size, this is going to be the blur of it. We can affect the opacity, and it's just kind of grounding it a little bit more. Like if we turn it on and off, before, after, it is set to multiply, so it's not going to be affecting things too much. And we can even just make it a little bit less aggressive. So in this case, it's even nicer to kind of turn up the background now. But I'm still going to opt for it to be pretty dark overall. One thing that I really like though is the background in this render as a good example of it. Just some kind of basic noise, right? So we already discussed this, but it's good to have a noise layer over everything so there isn't any gradation. So I'm adding a new layer, just filling it so there's something there, and we can go to noise, add noise, get this here. Gaussian will probably be fine, and just set it to multiply or overlay, and just turn it way down. And this way when we zoom in, see how there's like these lines here? It just kind of gets rid of that. But I also want some of these actual noise effects in here. So let's see if we can go to Google Images and type in dust overlay. And just get something like this, one of these dusty images. Try and find something with a good resolution to it. It's always good to have some of these saved. This is pretty small. These are all rather small, dusty ones, but we just want something that's sort of like some random noise. I suppose we could rip it out of Substance Painter even, because they have a lot of these kind of noisy, sort of grungy overlays. This one isn't too bad, but it's very subtle. I think a lot of these product ones are scaled down intentionally. Of course, we could alter our Google search so that it's actually like a specific size that we like. But this one, it's not the best. We could use this though, just as an example, and then we could just say plop it in the background. As you can see, it's way smaller than our scene, but we're using it as like a subtle background piece, so I don't really mind it being a little bit blown up, right? Like this really isn't the resolution that we want, but we're going to be using it to go and say, hey, let's set it to multiply, or screen rather, which is going to be getting rid of all of our dark colors. And we get something like this. Lower the opacity, and we just get some noise in the background to break it up. And I think this is kind of nice actually, because we have this kind of old vintage theme, and just having something that's a bit dusty kind of helps with that. I just hit Control J to duplicate it, then Control T to move it, and I'm just sort of rotating it. So we can kind of have twice as much grunge there. Well, let's just turn one of these down. In doing so, I might want to affect the background a little bit more. And something like that is mostly where I want to take this. Yeah, I think the only thing I'd really want to do from there is it's important to kind of write some way of contacting you onto it in case someone stumbles across this and there's no link to your portfolio. So what I typically like to do is just write my email. So obviously pick a font that's pretty good. With this one, what I would do is I would pick a font that's typewriter themed, like something to just kind of tie it all together. It is kind of ugly to just have this on top of everything. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure I downloaded some fonts that are typewriter themed. Yeah, this obviously isn't ideal. I was thinking I had some that were more akin to the actual like way that a typewriter would be stamped onto a piece of paper. But I can't remember exactly what they were called. I think I mentioned this before, but you'd be able to find it like pretty much kind of any typewriter font that you'd ever want on the website dafont.com. So let's just sort of go through how we would do that here. So we can go to dafont.com. I can type in typewriter, and we can find a bunch of these. So this is just a great example. What is a good typewriter font? I kind of like this. Something I still want it to be clear, right? Because it's contact information. So let's just say we go with this, for example. It is called JMH_type. When we open it, it has all of this documentation here. All you have to do is just click install on one of these guys, and these are all the different sort of versions of it. I'm not going to worry about that right now. Photoshop's cool though, where we can actually literally just go in here now and it's automatically going to update. So there we go. It just sort of is a great way of sort of tying everything together. Spacing is a little bit wide, so I'm going to highlight it, go to my text tool, and adjust the spacing on this guy. Stick him in the corner where he's out of the way. But this is just in case someone downloads this or comes across it on Twitter and they're like, who is this person? They can just reach you, right? It's a little bit obvious, so you may want to lower the opacity quite a bit. And yeah, that's it, guys. Like, that is our render. The only other thing that I'd recommend is this prop might not be the best example because of how ludicrous it is, but you could say, hey, let's turn on wireframe. Let's render this out with a wireframe shot. If we go into Maya, we can select it and be like, okay, it is 67,000 tries. And you can do a render with the wireframe and display the try count in the corner or something like that. But that's totally up to you guys, depending if you want to show that stuff off or not. So either way, this is it. That is how I would go about rendering this guy. One very important note is I wouldn't just do like this specific render. I would do as many sort of breakdowns as I could. Like, what I will be doing for this is something very similar to this scene here, where I'm going to be doing multiple angles. Like I said, some close-up shots like this where some parts are blurred. The keyboard is a really good place so that we could do that. Like a shot like this, it's really nice. Like just having that sort of simulated camera effect does a really good job of selling the believability. But I also want some wireframe shots like this. Once again, the try count is in the corner. This is really good. We spent a lot of time making good UVs, so we might as well show those off. This is literally just the UV screenshot grabs that we did from Maya, just sort of put together in a really clean way. I'd recommend doing stuff like that as well. And the final thing that I would like to do with this, and I'll probably be doing, is you can actually embed these sort of toolbag views like this into your ArtStation posts. To do that, all you'd have to do is set up the scene how you want it to be. Go to File, Export, I believe, Marmoset Viewer. So that's going to do it. Set up your settings how you want. Width, this is going to be the size of it. I don't think it matters when you're actually inside of ArtStation, but one thing to note is the lighting, as you can see, is a lot different here than it would be in the actual viewer. And the reason that is because there's no global illumination support here. So if you're setting up a scene for ArtStation, you just tick that off to really know what you're working with, as well as the toolbag viewer that is going to be embedded into a website can only support 3 lights. So do the best you can without GI and 3 lights. And it's just a nice little thing to add to your post. This one, honestly, I should probably revisit. The lighting is atrocious. The only good thing about doing this is we can now say, hey, I want to look at the wireframe. I want to zoom in certain places and see how this was made. Let's check out the roughness channel. Like, this is all built in directly. So if anyone wants to view it, it's completely an option, and it just makes it really good for a portfolio piece if you're trying to get people to understand your workflow. So that's why I'd recommend sort of including it. Take a bit more time than I did with this one to make a good piece out of that. But with that out of the way, guys, I honestly think that's it. I think we're done this tutorial course. I've been working on this for a very, very, very long time, many months in the making, and the reason I did this is because I really do believe that the best way to learn a lot of this stuff is to really just dive into the community. So hopefully this was a good contribution to that. Hopefully some people can learn some things. I don't expect anybody to watch this entire tutorial course. I think that's ridiculous to ask or have those kind of expectations. But I just kind of wanted to learn something myself, and in return sort of put it on the table, pretty much all I know about making high quality props like this. So hopefully some people out there found this very useful. I'm very happy to be done at this point. But yeah, thank you guys so much for coming along with me on this. I will be posting one more chapter after this, maybe in the future, but another thing I'm going to have included in this is kind of like a post-mortem. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I wanted to include kind of like me sitting down and thinking, how could we improve upon this workflow? There's definitely a lot of areas that I think deserve I guess like a better way of going about it. Especially in kind of like the earlier modeling and sculpting phases. There's ways that we could speed this up a lot, so I wanted to sit down and talk about that. So if you guys are curious, I think, you know, that's worth checking out, just a way to make this a bit faster, and more or less a summary of this entire process. But either way, this is it. Hopefully you enjoyed the course. I do have my contact information here. If you do want to send me an email about anything, I'd love to see your guys' creations following this tutorial. So yeah, my Twitter and my email will be in the description as well. On top of that though, guys, I like I said, did this entire thing for free, and it's taken me months and months. If you did find this useful, any kind of donation would be super greatly appreciated. Obviously that's not needed, but it's just something that sort of motivates me to do more stuff like this. But with that out of the way, guys, hopefully you enjoyed something about this, and hopefully you learned something during this this process. It's been a crazy adventure, but I'm really looking forward to moving on to my next project. Probably an environment of some kind, and if you guys want to stay up to date with that, like I said, my contact information and Twitter linked in this tutorial course, so go check that out and stay in touch. Yeah, I feel like before I ramble on too much, I should probably call this a video. But thank you guys so much for enjoying this, and yeah, hopefully I do something like this again in the future, maybe on a bit of a smaller scale. And if that's the case, I'll see you guys then. So yep, take care, and until next time, yeah, have a great day. See ya.